Aloha YouTubers, this is Kane Guy. It's been a while since I made a do-it-yourself video, but I'm back here again with a new toy. It's the Tavor stock trigger assembly. Today I'd like to make a video to show you how to disassemble and reassemble the Tavor trigger assembly. There is another YouTuber out there named Rose G, who I give credit to in learning how to actually disassemble the trigger and reassemble the trigger. He does an excellent job out there, and I give kudos to him for actually being the first person, I think, on YouTube to video the disassembly and assembly instructions of the Tavor trigger. Now, some of you may have an interest in learning about this process so that you can do the regular maintenance that's needed with respect to this firearm. Or perhaps you would like to tinker around with the components to see if you could make the trigger pull a little lighter. Well, there's a lot to be done with the stock trigger assembly to make it smoother, lighter, and just an all-around better trigger. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First thing you should do is familiarize yourself with the shape, the overall shape of the trigger assembly. The two sides are different from each other, one side being flat and the other side having a little channel cut into it. You'll note that there are 3 pivot points on the trigger assembly. The hammer pivot, the activator pivot, or the sear pivot, and there's another pivot here that retains the secondary activator spring that everyone removes to lighten up the trigger pull. So the first thing we're going to do is to remove the hammer pivot and the hammer spring. Now, to do that, you must first remove, well, let's go ahead and relax the hammer spring there. You must first remove a hammer securing pin right in there. And to do that, you need a very thin punch, I believe 2 millimeters or less. So go ahead and take your mallet and your punch and give it a few bangs until you feel the securing pin fall into the trigger assembly housing, and you can hear it actually rattling around in there. And that's how you know that it's punched out completely. Turn it over, and the pin falls out, and it looks like this. Very easy to lose, so put it on the side and make sure that you have it when it's time to reassemble the trigger assembly. Okay, from there it becomes quite easy. You take another punch and you push on this side of the hammer pivot, and it'll pop out on this side. If you have a difficult time doing it, then don't be afraid to take a mallet or a hammer and just tap gently until the pivot pops out to the other side, and from there you can continue to push until it completely comes out of the housing itself, and there you will see the hole through which the the hammer securing pin goes through. And so you put that on the side and then just gently lift out the hammer and the hammer spring. It comes out just like that. Now, you don't have to monkey around with this spring unless you really want to. You can sort of easily forget how to align this thing, so I just leave it on there. Now, the next pivot you must remove, well, is this pivot point right here that holds the secondary activator spring to the sear activator. This is a backup spring that helps the sear activator return to its original position, and you can take it off by pulling the spring off with your fingertips. If you can't use your fingertips to do that because it's not strong enough, or you hurt your fingers and your fingers are too sensitive, then just use a pair of needle nose pliers to loosen it off in that fashion. Then go ahead and take a small little punch and tap out the pivot point. And then you can go ahead and remove the secondary activator spring. Put that on the side. You can go ahead and remove the entire pivot if you wish, but since it's so easy to lose these parts, I just tap it right back in place and leave it as is. Alright, the last pivot to remove is the activator pivot. And the easiest way to do that is to take this concave side, put it down, then take a punch and either push gently, and if it doesn't move, then just give it a gentle rap, and then it'll begin to move. You'll hear a series of clicks when you do this. That's the first, that's the click that I was referring to. You can go ahead and put your thumb on top of the activator so that it doesn't pop out, or makes it a little easier for you to continue to push. And if it doesn't move again with just hand pressure, then go ahead and take a hammer and continue to just gently tap. And the pivot will come right out. And then from there you can just slowly lift the activator, the sear activator, and its components right out of the trigger assembly. Now take a good look at it, because this is how we must reassemble it once we've cleaned the parts or polished it. On the back side you will see an activator spring. This is the primary activator spring, and then of course the secondary is the one that people remove quite often. It goes on like that. Alright. Now the next step is to remove this bushing right here, upon which the sear pivots. And to do that, you can push from this side here, and the bushing comes right out. Put that on the side. And then you can pull the sear from the sear activator out. And there you will see in the sear activator a spring assembly. Go ahead and shake it out and it should fall freely. Now this spring assembly goes in one direction. You'll note that the spring has a head on one side and a point on the other. When you reassemble it, the point actually goes into the activator, and the head actually fits into that little concave area on the sear, like that. Okay? And that's how you disassemble the Tavor trigger. Now to reassemble the Tavor trigger, you go simply in reverse order. So you take the sear activator, You then take the sear plunger spring and the sear plunger and put the pointed part into the sear activator. Next, you take the sear itself. Now this sear will fit into this housing like this. It'll go in here, but I'm just, for the sake of demonstrating how this sear actually fits, it fits in like this. So what you'll do is, once you've got the sear plunger spring in there and aligned properly, the sear will go into this, right? And then what you want to do is take the bushing right here and put it actually this way. So let me go ahead and turn this over. The bushing will fit in with the head on this side of the activator as opposed to this side. And the reason for that is the activator spring must be placed on the activator just like that. So again, from this side, we put the bushing through this way as soon as we can get it lined up properly. Once you get it started, you flip it over and then line it up perfectly. And then once you've pushed the bushing all the way through, you then take the activator spring and place it on to the activator like this. There's only so many ways you can place the spring. Obviously, this is the wrong way. So you want the short end up against this diagonal piece right here. So it'll go like that. And what this does is it keeps the sear activator in a cocked position. So in the housing itself, it'll be situated like this. And this part of the spring will be on the base of this housing. So as you insert the activator assembly into the trigger box, you'll push the spring down like so, and it'll put tension on the sear activator. Okay? You take the sear pivot, try to line it up. Once you've got the sear pivot bushing in there, the next thing you want to do is reinstall the secondary sear activator spring right here. To do that, you need to push the pivot pin out a little bit . Just enough so you can slip one end of the spring into the housing between the pivot. I need a little bit more space. There we go. Well, that took a little bit of time. Alright, once you got it back on, you can go ahead and put the spring back over the sear activator. Then the next step is to install the hammer and the hammer spring back into the housing. And to do this is you will notice that the spring aligns itself up against the hammer this way. Now if you were to move the spring this way, then that would be the wrong way to align the spring. So bring the spring up against the hammer. You can put your thumb there to hold it. Then you're going to fit the hammer and the hammer spring into the housing itself like that. But what you're going to do is hook the spring onto the housing that way and then push, and then try to push it in. And this is probably the trickiest part, is to line it properly with just one hand, and then to try to put the pivot back in. Now you're going to put the pivot back in with this side going through the housing in this manner, not this way. And I'll show you what the purpose of this is once it's in. So again, try to properly align it and get it in there. And once you got it perfectly aligned, it just slips right in there. But otherwise, it can be rather difficult. You can push it in there with your finger. All right. So now you've got the hammer pivot back in there. The last thing to do is to put the hammer securing pin that we took out back into this hole right there. Now, in order for this pin to actually fit through that hole and through the pivot, you must properly align the pivot so that it lines up with the hole in the hammer itself. And for this, you need a small little screwdriver. You simply turn it until you see the pivot line up with the hole. Sometimes the pivot walks to one side of the housing, and you just want to make sure that you push it back in so that it's properly aligned. Now it's properly aligned. You can then take the pin, put it back into the hole, lightly tap it, get it started, and then you can take a punch, lightly wrap it, until the pin is driven in. And then of course you're complete. At that point you can just test the trigger assembly to make sure that everything works as it's supposed to. And there you go, reassembly of the Tavor Trigger Pack.